So joining me for a conversation this morning, we're talking about the polls, we're talking about the data, we're talking about the different thoughts that have been shared by different entities and even pollsters in respect of what the outcome could be of election 2024, with a focus more on the presidential election. But the question is, what are these pollsters saying and what can we expect as a people? We have different views, different opinions, and this morning, we're going to have a conversation with different sides on the spectrum. Joining the conversation, we have Dr. John Osai Kwapong. He's a CDD fellow. He joins the conversation. We have Musa Dankwa, who is Executive Director, Global Info Analytics. Musa Dankwa, should I add doctor to your name now?
No.
Okay, all right. So Musa Dankwa, Executive Director, Global Info Analytics. And then we also have the Director of Research and Innovation at the Kumasi Technical University. I'm talking about Professor Smart Sapong. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you too, Benjamin.
It's a pleasure having you join the conversation. So let me start with you, Professor Sapong. You came out with a recent survey that, purported, per the data you had garnered, that in fact, if we were to go to the polls, the vice president, who is also flag bearer of the NPP, would be securing some 49.1% of the vote, with John Dramani Mahama, the former president, securing 45.8%, and then some 2.2% to Nana Kwame Bediako, 1.2% to Alan Chirmanting, and the others put together securing 1.7%. Somewhere in May, June, you came out with a survey and some felt your data was problematic. You came out strongly and defended your data. Can you walk us through your methodology and how you came by this information, Professor Sapong?
Great. Ben, a very good morning to your good self and our cherished viewers. Backstage were, once again, my brother Musa Dankwa and my missing very old friend, Dr. John Osai Kwapong. It was an interesting exercise. We piloted around 1st of October to make sure our instrument was good for use. And we went out on the 16th of October. So for a total period of about a month. So by 16th of November, all was done. And then the period between 16th and the time the release was made would have been for the analysis of the data, making sure that the right infographics are done and then shared with the public. So that is in respect of the duration. In respect of the constituencies visited, we visited all 276 constituencies. In respect of communities within those constituencies we visited altogether 4,272, so 4272. And then in
4272 communities.
The sample, yes, please, communities.
All right.
And then in respect of the sample itself, the final sample size that went into the analysis was 99,355, as indicated on the summary infograph we have. In respect of how the communities were chosen, the design was called 51st percentile design. And that meant that for each constituency, if we rank the contribution of the polling stations to the total voter register of that constituency and draw the 50th percentile line, any plus one meant that there's going to be, the way we do 50% plus one. So that plus one. And then all communities that constitutes the polling stations that adds up to the 51st mark got selected into the list of communities to be visited. And the idea was that when you capture that, you'd have captured the majority views of the various constituencies. So that is in brief what we did. It was through face-to-face interaction with our respondents, and we tried as much as possible to use elevated respondents. When I say elevated respondents, persons or respondents whose views have some elevation effect. Clergymen, traditional leaders, teachers and educational workers, health and hospital-related workers, and so on and so forth. The summaries are there in the report. Chief farmers, market leaders, and so on and so forth. So that is how the whole process commenced and then ended with the summaries that we have.
All right, let me ask you, you've given us your sample size. So the 99,355 accounts for the 4,272 constituencies or communities you visited, right?
Yes, so the data, the 99,355, the sites where those information were picked were 4,272.
All right, that's exactly what I wanted to confirm. Now, what is your level of accuracy or your satisfaction with the accuracy of the data, plus or minus?
All right, so what you do, and let me separate the two. We have sampling error and then non-sampling error. So in respect of sampling error, I'm sure that is what you are asking. If you choose 99% confidence interval and you give yourself the least ever margin of error, with the algorithm I used, which is computed algorithm, not perhaps online app or an imputed plugin, you would get up to 16,500 as the minimum sample size to erase every form of sampling error, and then with the highest confidence interval as possible. So you can talk about 99% confidence interval. And the actual errors are errors that are estimated, or non-sampling errors are errors that are estimated after the actuals have been realized, so that error will be defined as the variation between the predicted and the actual. So we'll take notice of that. In fact, until you do the total, and even censuses would have some level of error associated with it. So that is inherent. But the more you increase the sample size, the law says that the more you reduce whatever inherent errors that might come as a related, as a cause of the sampling. So if the 16,500 becomes my minimum, all I need to do to reduce those inherent errors will be to increase the sample size. I increased and increased and increased up to a point where my duration of data collection has elapsed. So I ended, and that's where I got the 99,355.
Okay.
Others could have increased and increased, and the largest sample size you can ever have is the size of the population.
Okay, of course, and usually for the sake of resources, you wouldn't want to sample from every member of the population. Though in other jurisdictions, it is easier because, for example, in the US, some will come out and say, I'm openly Democrat, I'm openly Republican, so it's easier, and then the rest are in the middle. But you've still not answered my question in terms of the efficiency of the data. I just want to know, because, for example, your counterpart on the other side, though, yes, we are talking about sample sizes, would usually say plus or minus this. What is your level of accuracy? I just wanted like a straight off answer so we move on.
Oh, in respect of, and what I'm saying is that I have reduced the errors I have control over, which is a sampling error, to the barest minimum. So I have represented the randomness. I represented the randomness across all subsamples of the population, and even up to the point of the respondent's point.
Okay, so to make a point, your level of error is negligible. Is that what you're saying?
Extremely.
Negligible. So close to zero. That's the level of error. Close to zero.
Absolutely. It is not zero, but I like the way you put it, close to zero.
Okay.
Or not determinate.
All right. Thank you very much for your initial thought. One last bit before I go to Musa Dankwa. How did you, I mean, these surveys are expensive. How did you sponsor yours, this latest one?
Right. So when you have interest, money is not the problem. And let me start by saying, fortunately nowadays, professors are not that poor. You can ask my brother John. In the times I saw professors, at the time I was aspiring to be I saw one professor with a type of car, and you get scared as to where you want to go, whether or not the place is quite good. But I mean, let me assure you that if you have the team, and I've been in this business for quite a long time. I was a consultant way back in 2007. I've been engaged in many local and international activities. I was part of the team that did the census for teachers and educational workers here in Ghana. I was part of the consultants that did the first review of school feeding here in Ghana under Professor Mills's time. Poverty and human development, blah, blah, a lot of World Bank service. So I have a team. As I speak now, I can give you a team that reflects the number of electoral areas that we have here in Ghana. And there are teams that are used on many of the projects that I get.
So the simple answer is that you sponsored this yourself?
Yes, through the consultancies that I usually get.
All right, thank you very much. Musa Dankwa, you have also been putting some polls out there, and shortly we'll get into the details of what you've been saying. I've just mentioned what Professor Smart Sapong has said. He is projecting 49.1% thereabouts for Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia as far as the presidential ballot is concerned, and 45.8% for the former President John Dramani Mahama. And then the rest seem to be more like yours, not in terms of the specific percentages, but in terms of who follows. So Nana Kwame Bediako, then Alan Chamatin, and then the others. What is your take from your recent polls? You've been in the Ashanti and other regions. What have you seen there?
Thank you very much for having me. What I've seen in the Ashanti region is that after we finished our telephone tracking polls, we wanted to confirm whether the telephone tracking polls mirrors the field polls when we deploy face-to-face. We do believe that there's not much difference between them overall. So in Ashanti region, we went back there. We saw John Mahama on 29% in Ashanti region.
On what percent?
29%.
29%. All right.
But the average telephone polls, he was on 27%. So about 2% higher in the field than in the telephone poll. And Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia was on 68% in the Ashanti region, whereas in the field, it was roughly around 65%. So the differences between the field survey and field survey and phone survey, it's not material when you take into account the margin of error. So we are quite happy with what we are getting from these areas as far as the polling is concerned.
Now, there appears to be a sharp contrast between what data you are getting and what data Professor Smart Sapong is putting out. And the question is, why the disparities? I don't know what could account for it. Is it the sample size? Is it where you are interviewing people? Because both of you have gone through the length and breadth of the country. In recent times, you've added telephone polling as well. But what do you think accounts for the differences we're seeing?
I think if you listen to Prof, he was mentioning about targeting people of certain profession and also using what they call elevated respondents. Our work is entirely random.
It's entirely
randomized.
Okay.
Randomized. Even on the telephone survey, we don't know who we are calling. And the call is just dialed by the system and the person. So you have no ability to interfere with the randomness of the telephone calls. When you deploy people even in the field, sometimes you lose the ability to be randomized, to randomize people. Sometimes they do profile people because this person looks a bit serious. He may not want to talk to you, you let him go. So when you convert the field survey into telephone survey, you are able to improve the randomness of the selection process. And that is more accurate than any other means because, look, this sampling techniques works very well when it is probability sampling that is employed to get the responses. And I think that's the difference between what we have and what he has.
What would be the differences if you look at the latest poll, telephone poll that you have put out, the national one, and then the special regional polls in terms of the Ashanti, Ahafo, and Bono regions? How different are your statistics, your data, compared to Professor Sapong's? What is happening? Where are the differences? Let's get into them.
I mean, we have John Mahama on 51.9%.
51.9%.
9%. And Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia on 40.5%.
On what?
40.5%.
40.5%. Interesting.
Yes. Okay. And now, if you look at the average polling data for the 6-week period that will be polled, Mahama goes to 52.3% and Bawumia 40.4%. And Alan 1.9%. 4.7% for Bediako and 0.7% for others. But if you look at the trend data dating back to 2022 April, When we first did the hypothetical poll, Mahama was on 53% and Bawumia 38%. That was April 2022. The trend data shows today that Mahama is 52.3%, not far from where he was in 2022 April.
In other words, not much has changed.
Not much has changed. And the trend is what, for me, is very important. The trend gives you accuracy more than a single period average or single period poll. Because you're able to see and take out the noises that you may record over the period of time and see where the true numbers lie using trend data.
All right. A few quick questions I want you to answer very quickly. One, what is your margin of error? I asked Professor Smart Sapong, and he said that with his system, it's almost negligible, close to zero. What is your sample size? What is your margin of error using this randomized system?
I mean, if you look at the 2-week polling cycle, the sample size is about 5,000 units. And then if you look at the weekly tracking, it's about 2,600. So the margin of error for the 2006 is 1.86%.
1.86%, right.
And the confidence level is 95%.
Confidence level of 95%. Does it matter that your sample size is smaller? You've been conducting this more frequently, but does it matter that using this randomized system, which is different from what Professor Smart Sapong uses, does it matter that your sample size is smaller? In some instance, 5,000 plus. In another instance, 2,000 plus. Doesn't mean anything.
Look, Benjamin, when we interviewed 450 voters from Ashanti region over the phone, randomized, we got 65% for Bawumia. When we deployed 3,750 men on the ground in Ashanti region, we got 68%.
Okay.
So the difference between 450 respondents on telephone and nearly 4,000 in the field was just 3%. And that 3% had been taken care of or would have been taken care of by the margin of error. So if you have 65% in Ashanti region, plus the base margin of error of 1.8, you add that, you'll be getting close to what we got in the field in Ashanti region. So for us, efficiency in sampling is very important for us. It's not just the volume, but the quality of the distribution of sample and how random it is. For us, we are confident. You don't have to do big sample size to get to accuracy.
Okay. I'll be going to Dr. John Osai Kwapong shortly. But again, Musa, I don't want to miss this. That's why I asked Professor Smart Sapong about how he sponsors his surveys. I would put that same question to you and then add this for me. So you are saying that because there's a sharp contrast between what you've put out and what Professor Smart Sapong has put out. You are forecasting, as of today, 51.9% for John Dramani Mahama, 40.5% for Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. If you look at Professor Smart Sapong's polls, that means he is almost 19 percentage points away from what Professor Smart Sapong gives him, which is what you have given him. And John Dramani Mahama then slips by about 7 percentage points to 45.8%. So basically, you are saying there's not going to be a runoff, right?
Yes, but what you mentioned there with the numbers are just polling numbers.
Right.
On Friday, we're going to come up with our predictions of what the numbers will be. But from our side, there will not be runoff.
From your side? Because I remember in June, thereabouts, this question came up. Still, as of now, there's not going to be a runoff.
No runoff, no.
Okay, all right. If you look at Professor Smart
Sapong's
funding. Okay, all right.
In terms of our funding, I think if you go to our website, we have the list of our clientele on our website. Okay. The companies we work for, they are global companies. And we do a lot of work for them.
Can you mention some of them?
Oh, yes. We have Diageo. It's one of our biggest clients is Diageo.
Okay.
And if you know Diageo is the company that owns Guinness Ghana Limited. They own Guinness Ghana Limited. So they are one of the biggest clients we have. Okay. So what we do as part of the opinion polls is, in fact, part of our own job, because we do risk forecasting. And with risk forecasting, you must be able to do the polling to inform your risk forecasting. So whether we like it or not, we'll be doing polling regardless. But this element that we commit funds to is what we call our CSR, corporate social responsibility.
I see. Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, let me come to you. So,
and a quick one.
Who is this, Prof?
Yes.
Okay, brief.
I wanted to also perhaps add to what Musa Dankwa have said in respect of what could be accounting for the variation between what I have and what he have.
Hello, Prof.
He enters within the regions that he visits. So, for example, in his recent
Prof,
report,
we lost your connection briefly, so start making the point again.
Okay, Ben, thank you so much. I was trying to add to what Musa said in respect of what could be accounting for the variation between what I have and what he has. So, for example, I'm saying one may be due to the places, the constituencies he chooses to visit. That's against what I also choose to visit. So, randomly, he can choose maybe two constituencies in, let's say, I have. Okay, I decide to represent all constituencies as subsamples, and so don't need to take one out. The subsamples for me are heterogeneous. They do not share common characteristics, and so leaving one out would also affect the information you have. So that can also be the difference. So whilst he visits or whilst he works in two constituencies in Ahafo, I work in all 6. Whilst he works in maybe 10 or 11 constituencies in, or let's say 15 or 20 constituencies in Ashanti, I work in all. And my assumption, underlying assumption, is that Ghana can be deemed as one country, that's fine. But we cannot look down or overlook the fact that all 276 subsamples share some unique characteristics. Their heterogeneity cannot be overlooked. Their voting patterns are not alike, especially when you enter into the constituencies. Some may cluster as strongholds whatsoever, but once you go in there, you can have a constituency in a stronghold like Asokwa that will give you one polling station data that sounds like it's coming from Asawasi or elsewhere. So that may, for me, account. If anybody works in, let's say, 100 constituencies and the other works in 276 constituencies, that alone can be a source of variation between the outcomes that we have, irrespective of the
thank you.
Yeah, the methods, similarity of the methods.
Thank you for those points. But as someone who also engages in research, you do know that you don't need to sample if there's a country, for example, in the United States, you don't need to sample every state to be able to get a temperature of what to expect in respect of certain polls, right? You do know that, right?
Yeah, Benjamin, that is extremely correct. But one thing I find it difficult is when the comparison is made between US and Ghana, or let's say UK and Ghana. That for me is quite problematic. They are like 200 years away from us in respect of, in US, right on registration, they feel free to indicate I am for this or that. You see, that's the level of advancement that they have gotten to in respect of this thing we are discussing, democracy, elections, and all those things. They are quite open society, they are advanced, their literacy level, the understanding of things cannot be compared. I'm not saying we are that bad, but trying to liken us to US.
I'm not likening, but polls, empirical evidence, I mean, the methods that are used elsewhere are the same methods we use here, right? That is, if you're sticking to the right thing. That's all I meant. I'm not comparing jurisdictions.
Absolutely, but then there is some inherent things that needs to be taken care of when you are aware that our system is quite not like theirs.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that point. Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, having listened to these two pollsters, what are your takeaways for now from everything they've said? One uses a randomized system that he feels is pretty accurate with a margin of error of about 1.86%. The other uses a more, global method, not randomized, selective, but he says his margin of error is close to 0, almost negligible. You do research as well. What is your take?
Thank you very much. So for me, again, it's whenever I read, these polls, I I read them as what are the signals that they are sending to us, the end users, in terms of what they found in trying to gauge the temperature or trying to check the pulse of the voters. With such work too, your methodology would lead to the results that you get. I've followed both of them. I've followed their work very closely. And so you can understand how the sophistication of the methods leads to the kind of observations that you get. I don't read it. I know that the conversations going on in some of the public spaces is trying to pitch it as who is quote unquote correct or who is incorrect. But I read it as giving the methodological approaches of the work that they're doing. Does it help me understand the results that they are getting, and what do I make of the results? So, for example, if you look at the trends from Mr. Musa Dankwa's polls over, I think since 2022, even before the parties chose their flag bearers, you do see certain trends. You'd see places where the candidates have either lost some grounds, made up some grounds, things like that. If you compare Prof's baseline that came out, I believe it was sometime in June, to this one, again, you see, for example, for me, the biggest change that I see there is the number of undecided voters that have gone down. So it's a question of, for me, what are the strongest signals that are coming out from the work of these two gentlemen, and what do you make of it in terms of the implications for the elections? And if you were a candidate or a party, what does it say to you in terms of your strategy? Okay.
Now, look at the disparities in terms of the contrasting figures. Musa Dankwa is saying 51.9% for John Dramani Mahama. They've not come out with their final, permutation or forecast. Mm-hmm. But 51.9% generally for John Dramani Mahama, 40.5% for Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, which would mean no runoff, right? Mm-hmm. But then you go to Professor Smart Sapple, and he gives the vice president some 49.1%, and John Dramani Mahama 45+%. From where you sit, what is your analysis of that? I want us to dig deeper into the data, the real data.
So an undergraduate professor of mine, one time when we were talking about sample size, says to us, small is beautiful, but big is better, right? And the point he would always try to make is that at some point, though, you also hit a saturation point where you don't get any new information by increasing the sample size. So it could be that the views of 4,000 voters, when expanded 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you may get additional information, but it would also peak at a certain point where no new information is added. So some of the variations that both of them have explained in terms of not even just the sample size, but even how you go about sampling members of the population, your entry points into a particular constituency, can all contribute to what you get in terms of what voters are actually telling you. So you're right. It's quite a sharp it's quite a sharp contrast, but then their methods help you understand why you would see that sharp contrast. It would be good if we had other polls, right? So, and here I'm just going to use an example from the US where Real Clear Politics, what they do is they take all the polls from different pollsters, and then they do an average and give you a picture of, okay, from all of the variations in all the different polls that we are seeing, this appears to be the state of the race. And it would be, if we had a lot more entities, individuals doing this kind of work, then it would have been really good to sort of put it all together, average it out, holding constant the different methodologies that they use to give you a sense of the race.
Would you give more credence to international polls compared to ours? And I pose that question because, the Economic or Economist Intelligence Unit in the UK has come out with these time and again. And they seem to be pretty spot on. Whenever they say the tide is shifting towards the NPP tends to win. Whenever they say it's shifting towards the NDC, likely the NDC wins. Then you have Fitch, a global, entity that does not just do the markets and all of that. They also do polls. And they are also suggesting, both of these entities suggest that the NDC likely would win. It would be their election to lose, if anything. How much credence do you give to those?
I give enough credence to it, but I would not give it more credence than I would give the work of Prof. or Musa Dankwa. And the reason I say that is that, for example, if you look at EIU, if you look at Fitch, usually some of their take or analysis is also based on observations of country conditions, right? So, for example, when I look at Prof's poll, right, your initial instinct is to say that it goes against conventional wisdom, right? All the conventional wisdom will tell you that this is an election that should be a turnover election. If you look at the economic challenges, if you look at some of the governance issues, if you look at the fact that we are coming up to another 8-year cycle where normally we turn over our political parties, all of that conventional wisdom would say to you, this should be a turnover election. For me, though, as I look at the work of these two gentlemen and other conversations, I'm starting to feel like there could also be, and Musa Dankwa will tell you that whenever I engage him, I would say, are we looking at an unconventional election? Right. Where some of the things that have held true in previous elections, particularly at the 8-year cycles, may not hold true. When Prof did his baseline study, for example, that was one of my initial reactions, right? The more I kept looking at it, I said, well, are we in some... is 2024 different from all the different elections, that we have? But again, like I said, especially because they also make public their methodology and explain all the steps they go through to arrive at their answers. No, I won't give the likes of EIU or Fitch any more credence than I would give them credence for their work.
All right. Gentlemen, I'm taking your concluding comments, but I want to come back to you, Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, as I start with the concluding comments. Feed this into your concluding comments for me. If you look at today's daily graphic, election 2024, who takes the central region, it's topical because it is usually one of those kingmaker regions. Small, but it has its own dynamic in there. And then you look at the Ashanti region and Global Info Analytics poll suggesting that the Vice President, Dr. Bawumia, is on 68% and John Dramani Mahama on 29%. And then you have the others, Alan, Nana Kwame Bediako and others. But I'm concerned about the 68% because you know what that means. Falling below 70% could be disastrous. What do you read into those dynamics and your final comments?
Yes. So, for example, in Ashanti, which is a strong base of support for the NPP, as a matter of political strategy, I know that they would want a certain minimum percentage, right?
I've heard people suggest that they are going to get 80%.
Well,
I mean, members of the NPP. I think I've heard
right.
the running mate talk about securing 80%. So 69 versus 80, that's a far cry.
But I can also understand why he would assert that, right? I mean, you want to project confidence, right? You want to project a strong showing. You want to do things that would motivate your base to go out and vote. But if I were the vice president, right, I would look at this number and be a little concerned in terms of you really want to push it a little higher. For example, when Prof released his baseline survey, one of the concerns that I had about Ashanti was the percentage who were indicating they were undecided in the Ashanti region, because I said that's too high for your strong base of support. Central region, if you look at the polls from Global Info Analytics, it's looked a little more competitive than I expected because of the vice president or the running mate of former President John Mahama. It's been interesting to see how much traction that is gaining or not gaining in the central region. Now, he may pull off the central region, but the trends that I've seen in the Musa Danko poll, for me, just again, raises some concerns about how competitive that choice has made or not made the central region. Look, at the end of the day, these polls are about testing the pulse of the nation, getting a sense of what's on their mind, what's not on their mind. And eventually on December 7th, we would get the most accurate poll, which is what voters would actually do on that day. But again, I don't want the public conversation to be about who is right and who is wrong and who is sponsored and who is not sponsored. I look at it as at a particular point in time when I took a snapshot of voters, this is what they said to me, and we would get the most accurate poll on December 7th.
Thank you, Doc, for your final thoughts. It's been a breath of fresh air having you join the conversation. Professor Smart Sapol, please, between you and Musa Dankwa, I would give each one of you about a minute or a minute and 20 seconds each. So, Prof, I'll start with you. Hello,
right,
Professor
so
Sapol.
Ben, thanks for the, yes, I think it's clear now. Thanks for the engagement. Again, I agree that the central region remains competitive, even though I was also expecting some changes, but it's quite competitive. My resource purchased it at the NPP 49 and then the NDC 44. It's quite competitive. The base has been an MPP base. Out of 23 constituencies, 19 of them have an MPP base as in presidential votes. And then the top is where usually the shake-ups do occur at the parliamentary level. So the base is there, and I was expecting quite a competition, but it looks like I mean, this is how it will be until the real elections are conducted.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry to do this. You mentioned parliamentary. It reminded me of something I forgot. In what you put out, I saw some numbers there when it comes to parliamentary as well. Can you just briefly explain that for me?
Well, so everybody knows, or those who follow politics in Ghana knows that the NPP have more safe seats than the NDC in parliament. Even under this condition of hanged parliament, the NPP do have more safe seats than. So my projections have it, and this is after visiting all constituencies.
Okay.
My projections have it that the NPP would elevate their safe seats to 128, and the NDC will elevate their safe seats from the current 82 to 92. So that is in respect of safe seats. There are some 56 constituencies that are in there for a friendly fight, and then we see what happens by close of elections. Yeah.
All right.
So my conclusion is that, Ben, let us encourage internal resources that we have in respect of capacity or ability to conduct polls. When Fitch is in your country or Economic Intelligence Unit are in your country, they are in your country along with several other countries of the world. And the concentration will not be on Ghana. I mean, no, I'm not saying, I mean, you understand me. They are working in all countries, not only in Ghana. So the kind of attention, the kind of understanding myself or Musa Dankwa would have in respect of the dynamics on the ground here in Ghana, our peculiarity, they may perhaps generalize, globalize the dynamics to be the same. Okay. And so, yes, we will continue to work with them. We'll continue to read their work, believe in their work. But I am looking at a day where Ghana would establish its own and then empower those who have taken interest in there to have ones that will be trusted and be projected.
Okay.
That has always been my prayer.
All right. Prof, thank you so much. Time is not our friend. I know what you mean, like Pew Research and all that. Musa Dankwa, let's have your final word and we're out of here. Your thoughts?
Right, my final word. I think we've done enough polling in this country. And as we speak to you, are still polling in many places. And we have a very good view of what is happening. We believe that the results of this election will be one touch, clearly. And we also believe that Central Region will be won by NDC. And with the parliamentary numbers, look, we have looked at them in a very extensive way, using what we call the MRP model.
Okay.
And from what we are seeing, look, the seats that were saved NPP in Greater Accra are struck. There's no longer safe seat except 2 or 3 in Greater Accra.
Okay.
So the base on which some of these seats were determined as saved has changed. We believe that NDC will have a very comfortable majority in Parliament.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining the conversation. We had Dr. John Osai Kwapong, he's a CDD fellow. We also had joining the conversation Dr. Musa Dankwa, I beg your pardon, Executive Director, Global Info Analytics. And then we had Professor Smart Sapong, Director of Research and Innovation at the Kumasi